That cold morning, no one expected an act of kindness to change everything. What started as another day on the road became a story the whole town tried to explain, and few had the courage to tell. Before we begin, subscribe and turn on the bell. Here, we show that behind the engines and the leather, there are still human hearts. The rain had just broken, leaving the highway slick and shimmering under a gray sky that hung low like a shroud. Jack Harlan gripped the handlebars of his old Harley, the engine's low rumble vibrating through his bones as he eased into the truck stop off Interstate 40. At 52, Jack was a fixture among the Ironhawks, the kind of rider whose leather vest bore patches faded from years of wind and weather. His face, lined deep from sun and sorrow, carried the quiet weight of a man who'd seen too many roads end in dust. He pulled up to the pumps, the scent of wet asphalt and diesel thick in the air, and killed the engine. Silence settled, broken only by the distant hiss of tires on the wet pavement. Jack swung his leg over the bike, boots crunching on gravel as he stretched his back. The truck stop was a weary outpost, neon signs flickering half-heartedly against the overcast day. Eat and gas glowing like forgotten promises. Inside, the diner hummed with the usual crowd, truckers nursing coffee, a family squeezed into a booth, and a few locals hunched over counters stained with years of spills. Jack nodded to Maria, the waitress who'd been pouring refills here for 2 decades. Her smile tired but genuine as she slid a mug his way without asking. Black, no sugar. It was ritual. He'd stopped for fuel and a moment's peace, the kind that came rare these days. The Hawks were riding out later, a loose convoy headed west to scatter ashes for a brother lost too soon. But as Jack sipped his coffee, the door swung open with a chime that cut too sharp through the murmur. In strode Victor Lang, CEO of Langtech Industries, all polished shoes and tailored suit that screamed boardrooms and bottom lines. Victor was in his 40s, sharp-featured, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was passing through on some corporate detour, his sleek SUV parked crookedly outside like it owned the lot. Maria caught Jack's eye, a flicker of warning in her glance. Victor had been here before, tossing cash like it bought silence, barking orders as if the world bent to his wallet. Victor scanned the room, his gaze landing on Jack with the disdain of a man who saw grease stains as personal insults. Jack felt it before he heard it, the judgment, heavy as the rain clouds overhead. He kept his eyes on his mug, steam curling up like ghosts from the past. But Victor couldn't let it lie. He strode to the counter, slapping down a company card for Maria to run his tab, then turned, voice slicing through the diner like a cold blade. "You can't even ride straight," Victor barked, loud enough for the whole place to hear. Laughter rippled from a couple of his entourage, suits trailing him like shadows. He pointed at Jack's bike outside, visible through the rain-streaked windows, its chrome dulled by the weather. "Look at that relic, swerving all over the lane back there. What, too many miles? Or too much last night? Keep that junk off the road before you cause an accident." The diner fell quiet, Forks pausing midair, eyes darting between the men. Maria's hand trembled slightly as she set down the coffee pot, her lips pressing into a thin line. Jack didn't flinch, but his fingers tightened around the mug, knuckles whitening. He'd been riding clean that morning, steady as the horizon, but words like Victor's had a way of sticking, painting shadows where there were none. The Ironhawks weren't angels, rough edges from lives scraped hard, but they didn't deserve the spit in the face. Jack met Victor's stare, his own eyes steady, the color of storm clouds. No rage, just a quiet assessment, the kind that came from years of swallowing worse. Victor smirked, turning back to his phone, dismissing the moment like roadkill. But the air hung thick now, charged with unspoken tension. Outside, thunder grumbled low, and the first fat drops pattered against the glass. Jack drained his coffee, the bitterness lingering on his tongue, and stood slowly. He tossed a few bills on the counter, more than enough, always was, and nodded to Maria. Her eyes held gratitude, unspoken, for the times the Hawks had chased off drunks or fixed her busted-down car without a word. As he pushed through the door, the bell jingled softly, a fragile sound against the growing storm. The pump clicked off, fuel sloshing into the tank with a steady glug. Jack wiped his hands on a rag from his saddlebag, the fabric rough and oil-stained. Victor's SUV revved nearby, tires spinning gravel as it pulled out, oblivious. Jack watched it go, taillights blurring in the rain, and felt the old pull, the road calling, the brotherhood waiting. But something in Victor's mockery had stirred a deeper ache, a reminder of judgments that cut to the bone. He'd lost his daughter years back to a slick road much like this one, a crash pinned on a rider who wasn't at fault. The headlines had branded him a villain, the Iron Hawks as outlaws, while the real story drowned in noise. He mounted the bike, the seat creaking under him, and fired the engine. It roared to life, a deep, throaty growl that drowned the rain. As he pulled onto the highway, the world blurred into streaks of gray and green, but Victor's words echoed, a thorn in the quiet. Little did the CEO know, that careless jab would unravel threads of his own polished life, pulling Jack and the Hawks into a storm far fiercer than the one overhead. The road stretched ahead, unforgiving, and in its silence, choices waited, ones that would test the line between anger and mercy, isolation and the fierce loyalty that bound men like Jack together. Back at the diner, Maria cleared Jack's mug, her hand steadying as she wiped the counter. The other patrons resumed their murmurs, but the air felt different now, heavier with the weight of what hadn't been said. Outside, the rain picked up, drumming a relentless rhythm on the roof, washing away the morning's grime, but not the undercurrents of judgment and quiet resolve. Jack rode on, the wind whipping at his vest, carrying him toward whatever confrontation the fates had spun from a single mocking shout. The miles blurred under Jack's tires, the highway a ribbon of wet black cutting through fields that stretched empty under the relentless downpour. Rain stung his face like tiny accusations, soaking through his jacket until it clung heavy to his shoulders. He rode alone for now. The Iron Hawks scattered ahead in a loose formation, their bikes like dark silhouettes against the storm. The engine's rumble was a constant companion, drowning out the echo of Victor's voice, but not the sting it left. Jack had heard worse over the years. Cops pulling him over for looking suspicious, store clerks clutching purses at the sight of his vest. But this felt different, sharper, like salt in an old wound. By late afternoon, the rain eased to a misty drizzle, and Jack spotted the glow of taillights up ahead. He twisted the throttle, closing the gap until the convoy came into view. A dozen Harleys strung out like beads on the interstate, engines harmonizing in a low growl that cut through the haze. At the lead rode Tommy Bear Rollins, the Hawks' unofficial anchor, a burly veteran in his late 40s with a beard streaked gray and arms like coiled ropes from years fixing rigs in desert garages. Bear had pulled Jack into the fold a decade back, after the accident that took Sarah, Jack's daughter, when the world turned its back and the Brotherhood stepped in with quiet hands and open doors. Jack fell in beside Bear as they signaled for the next exit, a faded sign promising Riders Rest Motel, and a cluster of pine cabins hunkered against the wind. The group peeled off one by one, bikes purring to a stop in the gravel lot, steam rising from exhaust pipes like sighs of relief. The air smelled of damp earth and pine sap, mingled with the faint tang of motor oil that always seemed to follow them. Bear killed his engine first, swinging off with a grunt, his boots thudding heavy on the ground. He clapped Jack on the shoulder, the gesture rough but warm, eyes scanning his face under the brim of a worn cap. "You look like hell, brother," Bear said, voice gravelly from too many smokes and shouted stories over revving engines. "Storm get you, or something else?" Jack dismounted, the kickstand scraping against pebbles as he leaned his bike. The others gathered loose. Rico, the wiry mechanic with tattoos snaking up his neck, fiddling with a chain. Lena, Bear's old lady, and the only woman who rode with them full-time, shaking water from her hair like a dog. And a few newer faces, prospects still earning their patches, hanging back with respectful nods. They were a mismatched family, ex-soldiers, factory cast-offs, men and one woman who'd found in the road a rhythm that steadied the chaos inside. "Just a mouthy suit at the truck stop," Jack replied, keeping it light, but his jaw tightened as he pulled a rag from his pocket to wipe down the handlebars. The rain had left streaks on the chrome, mirroring the smudges in his mind. He didn't want to drag the Brotherhood into petty beef, but Bear had a nose for trouble, honed from tours in sand-swept hellholes. They claimed a cluster of rooms, the motel's neon vacancy buzzing faintly overhead, casting red pools on the wet pavement. Inside Jack's cabin, the air was stale, curtains drawn against the dying light, a single lamp flickering like a hesitant heartbeat. He shrugged off his vest, hanging it on a hook by the door, the Iron Hawk's patch, a stylized wing over a clenched fist, dripping steadily onto the worn carpet. The bed creaked as he sat, pulling a photo from his wallet. Sarah, at 16, grinning beside him on this very bike, her arms wrapped tight around his waist. The accident replayed in fragments, a semi-hydroplaning, the other driver a clean-cut exec who'd walked away with a slap on the wrist while Jack buried his girl under a sky just as gray. A knock rattled the door, and Bear lumbered in without waiting, 2 beers in hand. He cracked one open, handing it over, the cold glass sweating in the humid room. "Spill it, Jack. You rode like you were chasing ghosts back there." Jack took a long pull, the bitterness grounding him. He recounted the diner scene in clipped words, the chime of the door, Victor's polished sneer, the way the room had frozen like breath on winter glass. Bear listened, leaning against the wall, his face a mask of slow-building thunder. No interruptions, just the faint tick of a clock and the distant murmur of the others settling in outside. "That prick," Bear muttered finally, setting his beer down with a thud. "Thinks leather makes us trash. Like he ain't the one swerving through life, cutting corners for a buck." He paused, eyes distant, remembering his own run-ins, the VA denying his claims, calling him unstable, while suits like Victor profited off wars they never fought. The Hawks weren't saints, bar fights in dusty towns, runs that skirted the law, but they fixed what broke, stood for the overlooked. Last year, they'd pooled cash for Rico's kid's surgery, no questions, no fanfare. Outside, the group built a fire in a rusted pit, flames crackling against the chill, casting shadows that danced like unspoken loyalties. Lena stirred a pot of chili on a portable stove, the spicy aroma cutting through the pine, drawing them together in a circle of folding chairs. Jack joined them, the warmth seeping into his bones as stories flowed, tales of lost rides, brothers pulled from wrecks, the quiet victories no one else saw. A prospect, young Eddie with scars from a mill accident, shared how the Hawks had given him a bike when his world collapsed, teaching him the road's honest rhythm. But as night deepened, the motel's phone rang in the office, a shrill interruption. The owner, a grizzled woman named Flo, who'd seen every type of rider pass through, poked her head out. "Call for a Jack Harlan," she said, voice carrying over the fire's pop. Jack rose, a knot forming in his gut. It was Maria from the diner, her words tumbling out breathless over the line. Victor had returned after Jack left, flashing cash and demanding cameras review footage of the swerving biker. Lies twisted into reports, a state trooper already sniffing around, painting the Hawks as reckless threats. The town whispers were starting. Leather jackets mean trouble, engines hide danger, echoing the old headlines that buried Sarah's truth. Jack hung up, the receiver heavy in his hand, and stepped back into the firelight. The group quieted, sensing the shift. Bear met his eyes, the flames reflecting in them like embers of resolve. "We ride together," he said simply, no more needed. In that circle, under a sky clearing to stars, Jack felt the isolation crack, a small thaw, the first pull toward something beyond his solitary grief. The road ahead twisted darker, Victor's mockery unraveling into real peril, but the Brotherhood's quiet code hummed stronger. Protect your own and those who can't fight back. The fire snapped, sending sparks skyward, and Jack nodded, the weight lifting just enough to breathe. Tomorrow the convoy would roll on, but the storm Victor stirred was just beginning, testing bonds forged in rain and regret. The fire's embers glowed like dying stars as the group lingered into the night. The motel's gravel lot, a patchwork of shadows under the clearing sky. Jack sat on the edge of his chair, the metal frame cool against his palms, staring into the flames that licked at the air with soft, insistent whispers. Bear's words hung between them. We ride together. A vow etched in the smoke that curled upward, carrying the scent of burning pine and unspoken promises. The others nodded, their faces etched with the quiet understanding that came from shared roads and shared scars. Lena passed around tin mugs of coffee, black and steaming, the bitterness a balm against the chill that settled deeper than the weather. Eddie, the young prospect, broke the silence first, his voice tentative, like testing thin ice. What are we doing then? That suit's got pull. Cops, lawyers, the works. He rubbed at the fresh ink on his arm, a hawk's wing still red from the needle, a mark of belonging he wore like armor. The question rippled through the circle, drawing murmurs of agreement. Rico leaned forward, his wiry frame taut, eyes narrowed against the firelight. Ain't about fightin' fair. It's about not lettin' lies bury us like they did before. Jack felt the weight of their gazes, a pressure that pressed against the walls he'd built around his grief. Sarah's photo burned in his pocket, a talisman against the isolation that had ridden shotgun since her death. The accident reports had painted the other driver, a faceless exec in a hurry, as the victim. The hawks as the villains circling like vultures. Society's judgment had been swift, unyielding. Leather meant menace. Engines drowned out reason. He'd withdrawn then, riding solo stretches that stretched into years, until Bear dragged him back into the fold with a firm hand and a cooler of beers. Now, Victor's mockery echoed those old echoes, stirring the dust of doubt. Bear stood, his shadow stretching long across the pit, boots scraping gravel as he paced. First light, we head to that diner. Maria's calling it trouble. Let's hear the full tale. No rushin' in blind. His voice was steady, the kind that anchored storms, born from nights in foxholes where loyalty was the only light. The group dispersed slowly, bikes gleaming wetly under the moon, engines silent for once. Jack lingered, poking at the fire with a stick until it sputtered low, sparks fleeing like fleeting hopes. He retreated to his cabin, the door creaking shut behind him, the room's stale air closing in like regret. Sleep came in fragments, haunted by rain-slicked highways and Sarah's laugh cutting through the roar. Dawn broke gray and reluctant, mist clinging to the pines like a veil. The hawks revved to life one by one, a symphony of growls that shook the lot awake. Jack mounted his Harley, the vibration humming through him like a pulse, and they rolled out in formation. Bear at the front, Lena flanking him, the rest a steel-clad line cutting through the fog. The road wound toward the truck stop, 30 miles of empty stretches where judgments brewed unseen. They arrived as the diner stirred, neon signs flickering to life against the overcast dawn. Maria was behind the counter, her apron dusted with flour from early biscuits, but her eyes held shadows deeper than fatigue. She spotted them through the window, relief flickering like a match in wind, and waved them in. The place was sparse, a lone trucker at the end of the counter, nursing eggs and evasion. Victor's absence was a ghost, but his mark lingered. A state trooper's cruiser parked out front, lights off but presence heavy, like a storm cloud loitering. Maria slid plates of food their way without a word. Hash browns crisp, bacon sizzling. Her hands steady now, bolstered by the leather that filled the booths. "He came back yesterday," she whispered as she poured refills, voice low under the sizzle of the grill. "Flashed his badge. Well, not his, but some corporate pull. Demanded footage. Said you swerved into his lane, nearly clipped his SUV. Trooper bought it hook, line. They're running your plates now, Jack. Calling the Hawks a safety risk to the interstate." The words landed like gravel under tires, skittering into the quiet. Bear's fork paused midair, grease dripping forgotten, while Rico's jaw clenched, tattoos shifting like living warnings. Outside, the trooper, a fresh-faced kid with a starched uniform, eyed their bikes through the glass, radio crackling faintly. Judgment radiated from him, the same cold appraisal Victor had wielded. Outlaws on chrome, threats to the orderly world of suits and statutes. Jack's stomach twisted, not with anger, but a deeper ache. The isolation creeping back, whispering that one man's word could eclipse a lifetime of straight roads. But Maria's gaze held his, her own story unspoken. A single mom scraping by, fending off grabs from drunks until the Hawks showed up one night, engines idling like guardians. "You didn't swerve," she said firmly, sliding a hand across the counter, calluses rough from years of holding on. "I saw it all. He was the one weaving, phone in hand, king of the road." Her voice trembled at the edges, not from fear, but the raw edge of loyalty tested. In that moment, Jack saw it, the small act mirroring their code. No one hurts those we protect. It cracked something in him, a fissure in the solitude, warming like the coffee steaming between them. Bear pushed back his plate, standing with deliberate calm. "We'll talk to the trooper, straight." No bluster, just the quiet resolve that defined them. They filed out, a wall of leather against the mist, Jack at Bear's side. The trooper straightened as they approached, hand hovering near his belt, eyes flicking over patches like reading a threat. "Mornin'," Bear rumbled, voice even. "Heard there's some confusion about the road." The kid's posture stiffened, but Jack caught the flicker. Uncertainty beneath the badge. The human hesitation society trained out. Words were exchanged, measured and low, the air thick with the scent of diesel and damp earth. No raised voices, no engines roaring in challenge, just facts laid bare. Maria's witness, the diner's grainy tape that told the truth Victor twisted. The trooper's radio buzzed again, a dispatch pulling him away. But his nod was grudging, the judgment softening like fog burning off. As he drove out, tires humming on wet asphalt, Jack felt the shift, a thaw in the isolation, compassion threading through the brotherhood like veins of iron. They mounted up, engines firing in unison, but the ride back to the motel carried a new weight. Victor's web spreading, whispers in town halls and news feeds painting them as the villains. Yet in the rear view, Maria waved from the door, a solitary figure against the diner's glow, her thanks a silent anchor. Jack gripped the bars tighter, the road's hum vibrating with purpose. The confrontation loomed, not with fists, but the deeper battle, for truth, for the overlooked. In the Brotherhood's shadow, his grief stirred toward something redemptive, a quiet fire kindling against the storm. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far these stories of courage and loyalty can travel. The engines thrummed low as the Ironhawks convoy cut back toward the motel, the highway a blurred vein of asphalt under tires that gripped the drying road like determined hands. Jack rode in the middle of the pack now, no longer trailing at the edges, the formation a shield against the wind that still carried the bite of morning mist. Bear led steady, his broad back a constant ahead, while Lena's bike hummed just off his flank, her presence a quiet counterpoint to the men's heavier growls. The confrontation at the diner lingered in Jack's mind like exhaust smoke, Maria's firm voice cutting through the doubt, the trooper's reluctant nod as truth edged out the lie. It was a small victory, but victories on the margins always were. No fanfare, just the slow grind of gravel under boots, the weight lifting inch by inch. By midday, the sun broke through in fits, casting fractured light over the pines that flanked the interstate. They pulled into the motel's lot again, bikes settling with sighs of cooling metal, the air thick with the scent of hot oil and sun-warmed earth. Flo, the owner, leaned in her doorway, arms crossed over her faded flannel, a cigarette dangling from her lips. "Trouble following you boys?" she called, her voice raspy from years of motel dust and late-night confessions. Bear waved it off with a grin, but his eyes scanned the horizon, always watchful. The hawks weren't ones for drama, but Victor's shadow stretched longer than a CEO's ego, corporate strings pulling at lawmen, whispers turning into official reports. Jack dismounted, his boots sinking slightly into the softened gravel, and headed for his cabin. The door stuck as always, a familiar creak protesting the intrusion. Inside, the room felt smaller now, the stale air pressing close. But the photo of Sarah on the nightstand caught the light differently, a soft glow that eased the knot in his chest. He'd kept her memory locked away. A private road he rode alone. But the Brotherhood's pull was tugging at the barriers. Maria's stand had mirrored something in him. The overlooked fighting back, not with noise, but quiet steel. He sank onto the bed, the springs groaning under him, and pulled out his phone. A relic flip model, no frills, just enough to stay connected. A message from an old contact blinked. "Lang's making noise. Town papers got a tip line hot about dangerous riders. Watch your backs." The words hit like a sudden downshift, engine lurching into overdrive. Jack stepped outside, the sun warming his shoulders as he found Bear by the fire pit, now just a circle of ash-gray remnants. The others were scattered, Rico under a bike, tools clinking rhythmically, Eddie polishing chrome with a rag that whispered against metal, Lena sketching in a notebook, her pencil scratching soft thoughts onto paper. Bear looked up, reading Jack's face before a word spilled. "Spit it." "Victor's not done," Jack said, voice low, the phone extended like evidence. "He's feeding the press, calling us a risk, twisting that swerve into some outlaw saga." The group gathered loose, drawn by the tone, faces hardening in the light that slanted through the trees. No panic, just the steady build of resolve, like storm clouds massing silent on the horizon. Lena set her notebook aside, her eyes sharp. Men like him don't stop at words. They buy silence, bury truth under lawyers. She'd seen it in her own life. A brother lost to a factory cut by Langtech's mergers. No severance, just a pink slip and a lifetime of what-ifs. Bear rubbed his beard, the gray strands catching the sun like frost. "We don't chase suits, but we don't let 'em run us off the road neither." His gaze settled on Jack, heavy with the unspoken. This was personal now. Victor's mockery scraping at old wounds. The accident with Sarah had started much like this, a hurried exec, a false report, headlines that branded the innocent as threats. Jack had isolated then, riding into silence, letting grief swallow him whole. But here, in the circle of worn faces, isolation felt like a choice he could set aside. A moral fork loomed. Ride away, let the lies fade, or stand, risking the Brotherhood for a truth that might redeem more than just his name. The decision settled slow, like dust after a hard ride. "We find him," Jack said finally, the words tasting of resolve, his hand steady on the phone. "Not for payback, for the record." Murmurs rippled agreement, Rico's nod sharp, Eddie's eyes wide with the fire of belonging. They pieced it together over lukewarm coffee in the motel's cramped office, Flo eavesdropping with a knowing squint. Victor was headed to a regional summit in the next town over, a glossy affair of handshakes and deals, his SUV cutting through the afternoon traffic. The Hawks mapped it loose. No ambush, just presence. A quiet confrontation to counter the spin. They rolled out by early afternoon, the convoy tighter now, engines sinking in a low harmony that drowned the doubts. The road climbed gentle into hills dotted with scrub oak, the air shifting to a warmer tang of wild grass and distant rain. Jack rode point for a stretch, Bear signaling the swap, the wind whipping at his vest like an urging hand. Miles ticked by, the motel's isolation giving way to the pull of purpose. His mind wandered to Sarah. How she'd loved these rides, her laughter blending with the roar, unafraid of judgments. Victor's type saw only the leather, the patches, blind to the hearts beating steady beneath. The summit venue loomed as they crested a rise. A sprawling conference center off the highway, glass walls gleaming under the sun, banners flapping with corporate slogans. Valet stands lined the entrance, luxury cars parked like trophies. The Hawks pulled into the outer lot, a sea of chrome against the sleek lines, drawing stares from suited attendants who paused mid-stride. Victor's SUV sat prominent near the doors, polished to a mirror shine. Jack killed his engine first, the sudden quiet amplifying the distant murmur of voices inside. Networking chatter, clinking glasses. They dismounted as one, a wall of quiet strength, vests creaking softly in the breeze. Bear led toward the entrance, but Jack hung back a beat, scanning the lot. There, Victor emerging from a side door, phone to his ear, gesturing sharply to an aide. His suit hung crisp, but his face twisted in mid-sentence, spotting the bikes. The CEO's step faltered, eyes narrowing in recognition, the mockery from the diner flashing back like a rearview glare. Jack met his stare across the asphalt. No words yet, just the weight of unspoken truth. The air thickened, charged with the hum of idling engines, and the faint scent of exhaust mingling with cologne. Victor ended his call, striding over with forced bravado, entourage trailing like uncertain shadows. "You!" he snapped, pointing at Jack, voice carrying sharp over the lot. "Stalking me now? This is harassment. I'll have security on you." Laughter from his group, but it rang hollow, brittle against the Hawk's silence. Bear stepped forward, calm as a still pond. "Just setting the record straight, friend. No swerves, no threats. Lies don't stick on clean roads." The exchange stretched tense. Words traded like cautious probes, Victor's bluster cracking under facts, Maria's account relayed steady, the trooper's pullback mentioned without threat. Jack watched, feeling the shift in himself. Not rage, but a compassionate clarity, seeing Victor not as enemy, but a man blind to his own wreckage. The CEO's face flushed, defenses crumbling as a small crowd gathered, delegates peering from windows, phones slipping out. Whispers spread. The bikers weren't storming in, just standing firm, voices low, eyes holding humanity where judgment expected fury. Victor backed off finally, muttering about lawyers, retreating to his SUV with a squeal of tires that echoed his unraveling. The lot cleared slow, stares lingering on the Hawks with a new curiosity. Leather hiding not menace, but the quiet Justice Society overlooked. Jack remounted, the seat warm from the sun, and the convoy fired up, engines roaring soft in departure. The road ahead curved toward evening, tension eased but not broken, Victor's web fraying at the edges. In the rear view, the center shrank, but the warmth in Jack's chest grew. A step from isolation, toward the redemption of bonds that held when words failed. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of amber and regret, and the Brotherhood rode on, loyalty's hum steady against the gathering dusk. The dusk deepened into a velvet night as the Iron Hawk's convoy carved through the twilight, headlights slicing the encroaching dark like hesitant beacons. Jack rode near the rear now, the wind a cool caress against his skin, carrying the faint, acrid whisper of the conference center's exhaust, long faded behind them. The confrontation with Victor had left a residue, not of triumph, but a quiet unease that settled in his gut like undigested road dust. Victor's retreat had been hasty, his SUV vanishing into the traffic with a whine that betrayed more than bluster, but Jack knew men like him didn't yield easily. They regrouped, circled back to strategies in the shadows of passing semis, engines humming a low chorus of contemplation. They veered off the interstate onto a secondary road, narrower and rutted, flanked by dense woods that swallowed the moonlight. Bear signaled a stop at a roadside pullout, a forgotten overlook with a weathered picnic table scarred by initials and time. The bikes settled one by one, their growls fading to ticks and sighs, the air thick with the scent of pine resin and cooling metal. Stars pricked the sky overhead, indifferent witnesses to the gathering. Lena dismounted first, her boots soft on the leaf-strewn ground, and lit a small lantern from her pack, its glow casting warm pools on faces etched with the day's toll. Jack leaned against his Harley, arms crossed over his vest, the leather creaking faintly as he shifted. The photo of Sarah weighed in his pocket, a silent companion urging him toward the circle. Eddie hovered at the edge, his young frame tense, eyes darting to the road as if expecting headlights to pierce the dark. "He'll spin it worse," Eddie said, voice cracking slightly, the words spilling out like a confession. "Saw it in the mill. Bosses like him turn whispers into firings, make you the villain for breathing wrong." His hands fidgeted with a chain from his pocket, links clinking softly, a nervous rhythm that echoed the unspoken fears binding them. Bear nodded, settling onto the table's edge with a grunt, the wood protesting under his weight. "Ain't new, but we ain't runnin'." He pulled a flask from his jacket, the metal glinting as he passed it around, whiskey, sharp and smoky, burning a path to steady nerves. Rico took a swig, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, tattoos flexing like warnings. That trooper might be clean, but Victor's got friends in high places. Pulled strings on my cousin's shop once. Fines for code violations till he shut down. We stand quiet, they bury us louder. The words hung heavy, stirring the moral undercurrent that had simmered since the diner. Jack felt it pull at him, the isolation he'd clung to fracturing further under the lantern's light. These weren't just brothers. They were mirrors to his own buried aches. Bear's denied benefits, Lena's lost kin, Eddie's fresh scars from a world that discarded the broken. Victor's mockery had cracked open old judgments, but standing firm at the summit had been a step, a small act of defiance laced with compassion. No blows, just truth laid bare, forcing the CEO to see the men behind the patches. Lena's voice cut through, soft but unyielding, as she traced patterns in the dirt with her boot. "It's more than plates and reports. Maria called again while you were out there," said the town's buzzing. "Folks at the diner vouching for you, but the paper's running Victor's line. Reckless riders endanger highways. They're painting us as the storm, not him." Her eyes met Jack's, holding a depth that spoke of her own roads, nights riding solo after her brother's overdose, finding solace in the hawk's unspoken embrace. In that gaze, Jack saw the thread of redemption weaving tighter, the brotherhood not as outlaws, but guardians of the overlooked, their loyalty a quiet justice where badges failed. Jack took the flask, the whiskey warming his throat, grounding the swirl in his mind. He thought of Sarah's funeral, the empty chairs from family who'd turned away, branded by headlines that lied. Isolation had been his armor then, but here, under the stars, it chafed like ill-fitted leathers. "We go to the source," he said, voice steady, the decision solidifying like asphalt under heat. "Find out why he's pushing so hard. Ain't just ego, there's fear under that suit." Murmurs of agreement rippled, the group leaning in, the lantern's flame flickering as if nodding. They rode on into the night, the pullout shrinking in the rear view, the road a dark ribbon unspooling toward the next town. Hours blurred, the convoy a shadow against the horizon, until dawn's first blush painted the sky in muted pinks. They stopped at a quiet garage on the outskirts, a squat building with bays open to the morning air, the smell of grease and fresh coffee welcoming. The owner, an old Hawk affiliate named Gus, with grease-blackened hands and a limp from a long-ago wreck, waved them in without questions. "Heard the chatter," Gus said, pouring mugs from a percolator that gurgled like an old friend. "Victor's holed up at the Langtech outpost here. Fancy office pretending it's a factory. Watch the gates. Security's tight." Over steaming mugs, they planned in low tones, the garage's shadows hiding their intent. No grand assault, just eyes and ears, a presence to counter the spin. Jack volunteered to scout alone first, the others nodding, trusting the road's rhythm. He slipped out on foot as the sun climbed, following back alleys lined with chain link and rusting dumpsters, the air humming with distant machinery. The outpost loomed, a modern facade of glass and steel amid weathered warehouses, Victor's domain where deals were struck and lives rerouted. Jack hung back in the tree line, binoculars from Bear's pack pressed to his eyes, watching workers in hard hats mill about. Then, Victor, striding from the main building, face drawn, barking into a phone. But it was the figure beside him that halted Jack's breath. A young woman, mid-20s, with Sarah's eyes, wide, storm gray, framed by dark hair pulled back in a practical knot. She clutched a tablet, nodding to Victor's gestures, but her posture screamed reluctance, shoulders hunched against an invisible weight. Jack's hand trembled on the binoculars, the world narrowing to her face. Could it be? No. A sister, perhaps, or coincidence cruel as fate. But the resemblance clawed at him, stirring memories of Sarah at that age, helping at the garage before the road claimed her. Heart pounding, Jack lowered the lenses, the moral suspense coiling tighter. Was this the deeper truth Victor hid? A family tie? A vulnerability the CEO shielded with aggression? The isolation Jack had nursed cracked wider, compassion flooding the breach. Not pity for Victor, but understanding of the fears driving his barbs. Men like him built walls of wealth, but beneath, they guarded fragile cores, much like the Hawks guarded their own. Jack retreated, slipping back to the garage, the revelation burning like unspoken embers. The group listened as he recounted it, faces shadowed in the bay's dim light. Bear's brow furrowed, Lena's hand finding Jack's in a brief, steadying squeeze. "Changes the play," Bear murmured. "Not just clearing our name, might be saving his from himself." The decision hung, a fork in the road. Confront the lie head-on, or extend the hand society denied them. Jack nodded, the warmth of connection thawing the last of his solitude. Outside, engines waited, the Brotherhood's hum a promise of redemption. Not in vengeance, but in the quiet act of seeing humanity where brutality loomed. As they mounted up, the sun crested fully, casting long shadows that merged into one. The convoy rolled toward the outpost, tension rising like heat from the pavement, but laced now with a deeper resolve. Victor's world of glass teetered, unaware of the hearts approaching, not to shatter, but to reflect back the truth he'd mocked. Jack gripped the bars, Sarah's memory riding beside him, the road ahead bending toward forgiveness's uncertain curve. The convoy's engines thrummed like a restrained heartbeat as the Ironhawks approached the Langtech outpost, the sun climbing higher to bake the asphalt into a shimmering haze. Jack rode at the front now, Bear a steady presence just off his left flank, the formation tight and purposeful, cutting through the industrial sprawl like a blade through fog. The air grew heavy with the tang of machine oil and heated metal. Warehouses looming on either side, their corrugated walls scarred by years of neglect and ambition. Jack's grip on the handlebars was firm, knuckles pale against the black leather, but his mind churned with the image of that woman, her storm-gray eyes, the hesitant tilt of her head so like Sarah's in quiet moments. It wasn't coincidence. It felt like the road's cruel poetry, twisting fate to force a reckoning. They pulled into the outpost's perimeter lot, a vast expanse of cracked concrete bordered by chain-link fences topped with razor wire, security cameras swiveling like unblinking eyes. The bike settled in a loose arc, engines dying to a collective sigh, the sudden silence amplifying the distant clank of machinery from within the compound. Workers paused in their tasks, forklifts humming to a halt, hard hats turning toward the intrusion, whispers rippling like heat waves off the pavement. Lena killed her engine last, swinging off with a fluid grace, her eyes scanning the gates where guards in crisp uniforms shifted uneasily, hands resting on radios. Bear dismounted first, his boots thudding heavy on the ground, and nodded to Jack. "Easy now. We're here for words, not war." The group fanned out subtly, not aggressive but unyielding, vests catching the light in a patchwork of faded patches and worn threads. Rico hung back by the bikes, his wiry frame coiled, tools in his pocket clinking softly as he feigned a chain check. Eddie stood tall for once, the prospect's uncertainty hardening into resolve, his fresh tattoo a badge against the corporate glare. Jack felt the Brotherhood's weight at his back, a quiet anchor pulling him from the isolation that had shadowed him for years. This wasn't vengeance. It was the moral code uncoiling. Protect the truth, shield the overlooked, even if it meant facing the man who'd mocked them into the storm. The main gate buzzed open after a tense minute, a security chief emerging flanked by two others, his face a mask of protocol under a peaked cap. "State your business," he barked, voice clipped, eyes flicking over the leather like reading a threat code. Victor's influence hung in the air, invisible but palpable, the kind of pull that turned gates into barriers and questions into accusations. Bear stepped forward, hands open at his sides, the gesture deliberate. "Talkin' to Lang about a road mix-up that's spillin' over." No bluster, just the gravelly calm of a man who'd stared down worse than suits and fences. The chief's radio crackled, a muffled directive from inside, and he waved them through with grudging nods. Jack, Bear, and Lena only, the others to wait. They passed under the gate's arch, the metal groaning faintly overhead, into a courtyard lined with loading docks and humming generators. The woman from Jack's sighting appeared then, clipboard in hand, directing a pallet jack with quiet efficiency. Up close, the resemblance hit harder. Sarah's fine nose, the way her hair escaped its knot in dark wisps. She glanced up, eyes widening fractionally at the bikers, but she held her ground, chin lifting in a mix of wariness and steel. Jack's breath caught, a tremor running through his hand as he clenched it at his side. Who was she to Victor? Daughter? The ache stirred deeper, compassion warring with the old grief, blurring the line between enemy and echo. Victor strode out from the main building moments later, face flushed under the relentless sun, his suit jacket unbuttoned like armor half shed. His entourage trailed, lawyers with briefcases, a PR handler tapping at a tablet, but the CEO's eyes locked on Jack with a flash of recognition turning to fury. "You followed me here? This is trespassing. I'll have you arrested for intimidation." His voice rose, sharp as shattered glass, drawing stares from workers who paused, tools dangling forgotten. The air thickened, charged with the scent of ozone from nearby transformers, the distant rumble of trucks underscoring the tension. Jack held his ground, the woman's presence a silent pull at the edges of his vision. "Ain't followin', just clearin' the air you muddied back at the diner." His words came steady, laced with the quiet compassion blooming from the revelation, seeing Victor not as a monolith, but a man fraying at the seams. Bear flanked him, Lena a step behind, her presence a subtle reminder of the overlooked lives Victor's world steamrolled. The CEO's bluster cracked as facts were laid out again. Maria's testimony, the diner's tape, the trooper's retreat, each point a measured jab eroding the lies. Workers gathered at the periphery, murmurs growing. The bikers weren't raging, just standing firm, their silence more eloquent than shouts. But Victor lunged verbally, pointing at Jack's vest. "You think leather makes you heroes? You're road hazards, swerving drunks, endangering everyone." The words echoed his diner mockery, but now they rang desperate, eyes darting to the woman who edged closer, her face paling. She touched his arm lightly, a whispered "Dad" slipping out, soft as a plea. The revelation landed like a skid on gravel. Daughter, not sister. The gray eyes Jack's mind had twisted into Sarah's ghost. Victor's aggression wasn't just ego. It was fear. A father's shield against the world's judgments, much like Jack's own buried rage after the accident. The courtyard fell hushed, the hum of the outpost fading to a distant drone. Jack's chest tightened, emotion surging, a trembling hand unclenching, the long stare holding Victor's without heat. In that suspended moment, compassion overtook the rising tension, the Brotherhood's code extending beyond their circle. "We know roads that take," Jack said low, voice rough with unshed tears, "and lies that bury the truth." Victor faltered, the fight draining from his posture, his daughter's hand steadying him now. No blows fell, no engines roared in challenge, just the quiet confrontation of shared humanity, the risk of exposure balanced by the mercy of understanding. Security hovered, but the moment passed without escalation, Victor waving them off with a muttered retreat into the building. The Hawks withdrew unhurried, mounting up under the watchful eyes of workers who nodded subtly now, whispers shifting from threat to something like respect. As the convoy pulled away, the outpost shrinking in the mirrors, Jack rode with a lighter grip, the isolation thawing into the warmth of bonds reforged. The daughter's face lingered, a bridge to Victor's hidden grief, pulling the story toward redemption's curve. Tension simmered still. Retaliation's shadow loomed in corporate calls and shadowed reports. But compassion's quiet hum drowned it, loyalty proving stronger than the lies. The road stretched ahead, sun dipping toward afternoon gold, engines harmonizing in the breeze. Jack glanced at Bear, a nod exchanged, the Brotherhood's justice unfolding not in fury, but in the small acts that revealed hearts beneath the storm. If this story already has your heart, hit the like button. It helps the story of Jack Harlan reach more people who still believe in humanity. The engine's low growl faded into the afternoon haze as the Iron Hawk's convoy veered back onto the open road, the Langtech outpost a shrinking scar on the horizon. Jack rode in the heart of the pack now, the wind tugging at his vest like a persistent memory, carrying the faint metallic tang of the compound's machinery long after it should have dissipated. His hands, still steady on the handlebars, betrayed a subtle tremor in the way his fingers flexed, not from fear, but the raw ache of that courtyard revelation. Victor's daughter, Emily, her gray eyes mirroring Sarah's in a way that twisted the knife of loss deeper, had cracked open something in him. Not hatred for the CEO, but a reluctant empathy, the kind that bloomed unbidden in the quiet spaces between revs and regrets. Bear signaled a pull-off at a weathered roadside diner, miles from the outpost, its sign flickering open in chipped neon that hummed like a weary heartbeat. The group dismounted in the gravel lot, boots crunching underfoot, the air thick with the scent of frying onions and sun-baked earth. Lena led the way inside, her stride purposeful, while Rico and Eddie trailed, casting glances over their shoulders as if expecting shadows to follow. The diner was a relic, Formica counters scarred by decades of elbows and arguments, a jukebox in the corner silent, but for the dust motes dancing in slanted light. They claimed a corner booth, the vinyl seats creaking under their weight, and a waitress, middle-aged, with laugh lines etched deep, poured coffee without a word, her eyes holding the quiet solidarity of those who'd seen rough crowds come and go. Jack slid in last, the photo of Sarah pressing against his thigh like a pulse. He stared into the black liquid steaming in his mug, steam curling up in fragile wisps that blurred the edges of his reflection. The confrontation replayed in fragments. Victor's flush, Emily's whispered "Dad," the way the workers' murmurs had shifted from suspicion to something softer, almost reverent. It wasn't victory. It was a mirror held up to the CEO's polished facade, reflecting back the fragility he'd hidden behind barbs and badges. Jack's isolation, once a solitary ride through grief's endless miles, felt eroded now, worn down by the Brotherhood's unyielding presence. Bear across from him broke the silence, his voice a low rumble over the clink of spoons. That girl, Emily, she's the key. Saw it in his eyes. Man's fightin' ghosts, same as you. The words landed soft but heavy, stirring the moral undercurrent that had pulled them this far. Lena nodded, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug, the porcelain warm against her skin. Fear makes monsters of us all. He mocks to keep the world at bay, thinks leather's the threat when his own house is glass. Her own losses echoed in the quiet, a family fractured by corporate greed, her brother's overdose a silent casualty of Victor's mergers. Eddie leaned in, his young face taut, the chain in his pocket clinking as he shifted. But what now? He won't let it slide. Betsy's on the phone already, spinning us as stalkers to every cop from here to the border. Rico grunted agreement, his tattoos shifting like shadows as he cracked his knuckles, the sound sharp in the booth's hush. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the lot that merged with the bike's silhouettes, engines cooling with faint ticks that punctuated the tension. Jack's mind wandered to Sarah's last ride, the rain-slicked curve, the semi's horn blaring like judgment, the headlines branding an innocent rider as the villain while the exec walked free. Victor's aggression mirrored that deflection, a father's desperate shield against vulnerability. Compassion stirred uninvited, a small flame in the chest where isolation had once held court. "We don't push," Jack said finally, his voice rough, eyes lifting to meet Bear's steady gaze. "But we don't vanish. If he comes at us, we show him the road's got room for truth." The booth fell quiet, the weight of his words settling like dust after a storm. The Brotherhood's loyalty a tangible warmth against the diner's chill draft. As dusk crept in, painting the windows in bruised purples, a low rumble approached, not their engines, but the growl of multiple vehicles pulling into the lot. Heads turned, coffee cups pausing mid-sip. Through the glass, Jack spotted them. 3 black SUVs, tinted windows gleaming like obsidian, circling the bikes with deliberate slowness. Victor's retaliation, swift and shadowed, the corporate machine grinding into motion. The waitress's hand trembled as she cleared a plate, her whisper carrying, "Security detail. Langtech's got him on payroll. Rough types, not cops." Tension coiled, the air thickening with the scent of impending rain, thunder grumbling distant like a warning. Bear rose slowly, his chair scraping back with a deliberate screech, and the group followed, filing out into the fading light. The SUVs idled, doors opening to reveal broad-shouldered men in dark jackets, faces hard and impassive, hands visible but poised. No badges, just the quiet menace of hired muscle, Victor's way of escalating without fingerprints. One stepped forward, build like a wall, voice flat as pavement. "Mr. Lang requests you clear out, permanently. This road's no place for your kind." The words hung, laced with threat, eyes flicking over the vests as if measuring for cuffs or worse. Jack felt the pull, the rising conflict, contained rage simmering beneath the surface, balanced by the compassion that had taken root. No one moved to draw. The Hawk stood firm, a line of leather and resolve, engines silent but ready. Emily's face flashed in his mind, her hesitant touch on Victor's arm, and Jack stepped ahead, voice even. "Tell your boss the road don't bend for suits, or shadows." The lead man hesitated, radio crackling at his belt with muffled orders. Perhaps Victor watching from afar, second-guessing the play. Rain began to patter, soft at first, then steady, drumming on the gravel like hesitant applause. The standoff stretched, seconds elongating into heartbeats, the moral suspense taut as a wire. Workers from the diner peered from the door, a small crowd forming, their stares shifting from fear to curiosity, the bikers not lunging, but holding ground with a quiet dignity that undercut the aggression. One of the shadows shifted, murmuring into his radio, and slowly, the SUVs peeled away, tires hissing on wet asphalt, vanishing into the night like retreating thunder. No blows exchanged, no sirens wailing, just the quiet justice of presence, the Brotherhood's code proving unbreakable. They mounted up under the downpour, rain sheeting off their jackets in rivulets that traced paths like unshed tears. Jack fired his engine last, the roar cutting through the storm, and the convoy rolled out, headlights piercing the veil. The tension lingered, a shadow on the horizon, but in the rear view, the diner's light glowed faint, a beacon of the overlooked standing witness. Jack's evolution pressed forward, from solitary grief to this shared compassion, redemption glinting like wet chrome. The road curved into darkness, Victor's next move unknown, but the hum of loyalty drowned the doubt, carrying them toward the revelation that would redefine it all. The rain hammered down in relentless sheets as the Iron Hawk's convoy sliced through the night, headlights carving tunnels in the downpour that blurred the world into a watercolor of grays and blacks. Jack rode steady in the core of the pack, water sluicing off his helmet in cold rivulets that traced icy paths down his neck, soaking into the collar of his vest. The engine's vibration thrummed through his gloves, a rhythmic anchor against the storm's fury, but his mind raced ahead, tangled in the threads of the day's unraveling. Victor's shadows retreating from the diner lot had been a hollow win, tires hissing away into the dark, leaving only the echo of threats unspoken. Yet the air felt charged still, heavy with the promise of escalation, the kind that didn't end with engines cooling, but with truths clawing their way to the surface. Bear's taillight flickered up ahead, signaling a slowdown as the road curved toward a cluster of lights on the outskirts. A small-town motel huddled against the highway like a weary sentinel. The group peeled off one by one, bikes growling to a halt in the muddy lot, steam rising from exhausts and ghostly plumes that the wind whipped away. Jack dismounted last, his boots sinking into the sodden gravel with a wet crunch, the scent of wet earth and diesel mingling sharp in his nostrils. Lena shook rain from her hair, droplets scattering like reluctant confessions, while Rico muttered curses under his breath, wiping his face with a sleeve darkened by the deluge. Eddie lingered by his bike, eyes scanning the shadows beyond the motel's flickering sign, the chain in his pocket clinking softly as he shifted weight from foot to foot. Inside the lobby, the air was thick with the musty tang of old carpet and instant coffee brewing in a corner machine. The clerk, a thin man with glasses fogged from the humidity, handed over keys without meeting their eyes, his nod curt, but unjudging. They claimed rooms in a row, doors banging shut against the storm's howl. Jack's was sparse, a sagging bed, a lamp casting yellow pools on peeling wallpaper, the window streaked with rain that drummed a ceaseless tattoo. He shrugged off his jacket, hanging it to drip onto the linoleum, and sank onto the edge of the mattress, the springs creaking like old bones. The photo of Sarah slipped from his pocket, landing face up on the comforter. Her smile frozen in time, eyes bright with the promise of endless roads. The resemblance to Emily gnawed at him, a deeper truth emerging not in accusations, but in the quiet mirror of shared loss. Victor's mockery a shield for a father's unspoken terror, much like Jack's isolation had armored his own grief. A knock rattled the door, low and insistent. Bear lumbered in, water pooling at his feet, followed by Lena carrying a thermos of something hot. "Can't shake it," Bear said, voice gravelly over the rain's roar outside. Gus called. Victor's pulling every string. Cops on standby, press sniffing for a biker threat angle. He's cornered, lashing out. Lena poured steaming liquid into mismatched mugs, the aroma of herbal tea cutting through the damp chill, her hand steady despite the flicker of worry in her eyes. Eddie poked his head in next, face pale under the lamp's glow. "Saw headlights tailing us a mile back. Lost 'em in the curves, but they're out there. The room tightened, tension coiling like a spring, the moral suspense peaking in the confined space. Retaliate and risk the Brotherhood's fragile peace, or extend the compassion that had carried them this far. Jack's fingers tightened around the mug, the heat seeping through porcelain to warm skin chilled to the bone. Isolation had been his refuge once, after Sarah's crash. Withdrawing into solo rides, letting the road swallow his rage while the world branded the Hawks as heartless. But Victor's daughter had shifted the horizon, Emily's hesitant "Dad," the way she'd steadied him, echoing Jack's own phantom ache for a hand that would never return. "It's not just about us anymore," Jack murmured, his voice rough, eyes distant on the rain-lashed window. "He's scared, like I was. Lost a kid to the road once. Lies buried the truth, left me riding shadows." The confession hung, raw and unadorned, the group's silence a blanket of understanding. Bear's hand clapped his shoulder, heavy and reassuring, while Lena's gaze softened. Tears held back in the quiver of her lip. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the walls, and headlights swept the lot outside. SUVs again, circling slow like predators in the storm. The group tensed, but Jack rose first, pulling on his vest with deliberate calm. "We face it. Together." They stepped out into the downpour, rain stinging like accusations, engines firing in a defiant chorus that drowned the approaching rumble. The SUVs halted at the lot's edge, doors opening to spill shadows into the floodlit gravel. Victor's men, faces grim, but this time, a figure emerged from the lead vehicle that halted them all. Victor himself, coat flapping in the wind, Emily at his side under a shared umbrella, her face drawn but resolute. The confrontation unfolded in the rain's relentless hush, words shouted over the gale. Victor's voice cracked first, bluster giving way to desperation. "You think you know me? That swerve. You have no idea what roads I've lost." Emily stepped forward, umbrella tilting, water streaming down her face as she met Jack's eyes. "The accident," she said, voice trembling but clear. "The one that took my mom. Dad blames every rider, every shadow on the highway. He saw you swerve, or thought he did, and it broke something." The revelation landed like lightning, Victor's mockery rooted not in disdain, but mourning, a parallel grief that Jack recognized in the CEO's haunted stare. Sarah's crash had been pinned on a faceless exec, Victor's wife lost to a biker misjudged by haste. The cycle of judgment, broken now in the storm's raw light. No fists flew, no engines revved in rage. Instead, a quiet bridge formed. Jack extended a hand, rain-slick and steady. "Roads take from all of us, but lies don't heal." Victor hesitated, then clasped it, the grip firm, eyes glistening with unshed rain or tears. Emily's nod was small, a tremor in her frame releasing as compassion bridged the chasm. Two fathers, two daughters' echoes, finding mercy where brutality loomed. The shadows retreated, SUVs vanishing into the night, leaving the Hawks under the motel's glow, bonds reforged in the deluge. As dawn broke, gray light filtering through clearing skies, the convoy rolled out one last time, the highway drying under tires that hummed with purpose. Jack rode with Sarah's memory not as burden, but companion. The isolation dissolved in the Brotherhood's wake. Redemption whispered in the wind, compassion behind strength, loyalty transcending fear. In the quiet hum of engines, he thought, true family isn't blood or badges, but the hands that pull you from the wreckage, proving humanity endures where the road bends. Subscribe for more stories of compassion, justice, and redemption. Thank you for watching the case of You Can't Even Ride Straight. See you in the next one.